Hello everyone. My name is Mark Gilbert. I'm the exhibitions librarian here at the State Library of South Australia. The State Library acknowledges that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pays respects to elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. We acknowledge that they are of continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today. And we also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations people. Before I introduce our guest speaker, I'd just like to say a few words about the Joseph Stanislaw Ostoja-Kotkowski archive in the library's collection. The first record of Mr. Ostoja-Kotkowski's intention of donation of his archive was signed by him in 1989. However, it was not until his passing in 1994 that the great bulk of his records arrived here, I believe with the help of artist John Dowitz, filmmaker Ian Davidson, and his executor, Andrew Booth, along with then Mortlake librarian Elizabeth Ho, our manager of archives at the time, Margaret Southcott. The records were largely described by our archivist, June Edwards, and thousands of digital files were processed and saved by our reformatting and conservation team. Stan, as he has come to be known in our library shorthand, has been described as Australia's first multimedia artist, and the description of his collection in our catalogue reflects this. The archival group consists of files relating to his life and art. Papers, programs, pamphlets, photographs, slides, negatives relating to his theatre designs, sculptures, murals, art, films, videos and audio tapes, laser shows, computer graphics, stained glass, photography, computer discs, original artworks, a theatre set model, and models of sculptures. And it also holds papers related to his immigration to Australia and his relationship to his Polish family and the Polish community both here and in Poland. In 2008, his archives here at the State Library and the Baillieu Library at the University of Melbourne were included in the UNESCO Australian Memory of the World program. Who better to tell us about Stan than Maria Zagala, curator, prints, drawings and photographs at the Art Gallery of South Australia. Maria was also born in Poland, coming to Australia in 1980. In her lecture, she draws on her recently published contribution on the artist to Margot Osborne's book, The Adelaide Scene, Becoming Contemporary 1939 to 2000, published by the Wakefield Press in 2023. Could you please welcome Maria now?
Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here, and I just wanted to also say that, as Mark mentioned, this lecture has really come together, and my research is based on a chapter that I contributed to Margot Osborne's The Adelaide Art Scene, which is this really remarkable book, hefty tome, which I'll leave up here if you want to look at it after the lecture. So it's lovely to be invited to speak on this intriguing artist, Stanislaw Ostoja-Kotkowski, who I will just refer to as Ostoja in my lecture, and as he often signed his works. In preparation for today's lecture, I interviewed John Dowitz, who is an artist and who was a close collaborator of Ostoja's, and I'm really grateful to him for sharing with me his reminiscences of Ostoja the man, the artist, and I really wanted to get a sense of who he was as a person, coming to this material, as a curator, an art historian, decades after the fact and decades after the artist's death. So my observations about him really rely on John's memory too. So I just wanted to start by saying that the Polish-born Ostoja, whose birth and death dates are 1922 to 1994, arrived in Australia in 1949, and over the next 4 decades made his mark in an astonishing number of fields, from painting, photography and film to kinetic sculpture, stage design and mural art. It was, however, his work as an international pioneer of laser art and immersive light and sound experiences in the 1960s and 1970s that count as his most significant contribution, anticipating many of the developments that have since become central to contemporary practice. He was ambitious, forward-thinking and unconventional, and his path as an artist was shaped by the cultural currents of the early 20th century. Reflecting on his childhood, Ostoja identified an early impulse to connect his experience of pure colour and sound. It was not until 1954, on Adnyamatha country in the South Australian desert town of Lee Creek, that Ostoja experienced an epiphany that guided his purpose as an artist. Over the next 4 decades, he approached this aim in a range of media, resulting in a multidisciplinary practice that has not yet been assessed in its totality, but rather in its parts. And that's a really large task. I'm only just scratching the surface here in this 1-hour lecture. There are so many other parts of Ostoja's practice that I won't even cover. That's how wide-ranging he was. From his early forays into abstract photography, kinetic sculpture, op art paintings, to his ambitious laser concerts and 30-metre light tower in the centre of Adelaide, Ostoja sought to create experiences for the viewer that brought the hidden dimension of existence into tangible form. His desire to reach wide, non-specialist audiences saw him collaborate with experts in many fields, translating their knowledge into large productions with maximum impact. And in fact, John Dowitz shared with me that Ostoja had this acute facility to seek out people with obscure technology in the outskirts of Adelaide to the heads of industry, and was able to approach both, not just locally, but internationally. He was recognised for his contribution to the cultural life of Australia with an Order of Australia in 1992, and his presence in popular culture ranged from a postage stamp, as you can see here, to appearances on television. The value of that Ostoja placed on his own work, carefully preserving his drawings and sketchbooks, slides, photographs, confirm his self-belief. It led him to negotiate major gifts of his work with several institutions before his death. These included the State Library here, the Art Gallery of South Australia, the Balliol Library at the University of Melbourne, and the National Gallery of Art in Warsaw. A further posthumous gift by the Booth family to the Flinders University Museum of Art has resulted in a unusually complete and large archive from which to assess Ostoja's contribution to South Australian, national and international art. And as Mark mentioned, the importance of his work was recognised in 2008 when UNESCO placed the archives at the State Library and the Balliol Library in the memory of the World Register for Australia. So who was Ostoja? Well, he was born in a small town of Golub, north of Warsaw, in Poland in 1922. And at only 16, when the Second World War broke out, his father, a bank manager, was a captain in the Polish army and was taken prisoner by the Germans. While Ostoja was transported to Germany towards the end of the war to work in forced labour. Interestingly, in his own interviews after coming to Adelaide, he rarely describes this as a hardship. He rather focused on reminiscences of his self-discovery in art and sound and mechanics in the household, radios, his kind of academic competitiveness, the private drawing and painting lessons that he made with the post-impressionist artist Olgrid Wojtecko in Poland, and even ruefully remarks that his father's imprisonment by the Germans allowed him the freedom to have those lessons. His father didn't approve of him becoming an artist. In Germany, at the close of the war, Ostoja won a scholarship to study at the prestigious Kunstakademie in Düsseldorf, and he worked really hard to secure a place amongst only 12 to do so out of 400 applicants. His 4-year degree from 1946 to 49, can you imagine, in the ruins of Germany at that time, gave him a training influenced by Bauhaus principles. While in Germany, he became fascinated by the opera, which he regularly attended with fellow students. With him observing, "I was a bit of an odd man out. I have been all my life." Ostoja was keen to get away from Europe, and in 1949 travelled to Australia on the Fair Sea as a displaced person, arriving in October of that year and being interned at the Bonegilla Migrant Training Centre. He was just 27 years of age. Throughout his life, Ostoja maintained close links with the Polish community and corresponded with his Polish family and acquaintances in Europe. He returned to Poland on his first trip to Europe in 1967 and again in 1991, collaborating with the Philharmonic on a series of laser concerts. In 1991, he was awarded an Order of Merit from the Polish government and was the subject of a posthumous exhibition at the National Gallery of Art in Warsaw. Like many educated migrants fluent in 2 or more languages, but not English, Ostoja's first years must have presented many challenges, both in terms of language but financial hardship. An early introduction to Clem Christensen, editor of the leading literary journal Meanjin, paved the way for his initial success in Melbourne, enabling him to learn English through frequent meetings with Christensen and fellow artists Louis Kahan and Jock Frater. This is a portrait of him from the Melbourne years around 1953. So Ostoja managed to return to studying in Melbourne at the National Gallery of Art School under Alan Sumner and William Dargy, which must have been difficult because he wasn't fluent in English at that time. And he graduated and worked as a fabric designer and hoped to break into the conservative graphic design field without success. You can see here a photograph of him in his Melbourne studio with pen and ink and wash drawings in the background, in the style of Picasso and Matisse. And here are a couple of other images, these from the Flinders University collection, of the kinds of drawings he was making in these early years. Very eclectic. Life drawing, portraits, kind of stylised drawings, of musicians in orchestras, and pure abstraction. And this is an example of his fabric design, I think, or ideas for graphic design, which, as I say, he was not successful in. In 1953, after seeing an advertisement in the newspaper for a painter, Ostoja borrowed £50 from Christensen to travel to the coal mining town of Lee Creek in the outback, South Australia, to take up the position. And there's a wonderful anecdote that's published in Lois Carrington's book from 1977, which describes his departure. So he got to Lee Creek, and I'm just reading her remarks. He told the foreman he was after the job as painter. "Rightio," he was told. "See those trains over there? See the numbers on them? Well, paint them." Stan did. It dawned on him, quick smart, what sort of painter he had become. Days, weeks went by, and the painter did his work, job after monotonous job, saving up towards the day. Then the foreman went on leave to Adelaide. As his plane flew low to land again at Lee Creek, he let out a roar of rage. The roofs of the houses, all beforehand a sedate biscuit shade, were now every colour of the rainbow. So Ostoja spent a year at Lee Creek, and this vivid desert landscape may date from this time. Ostoja observed the terrific iridescence you can get behind the eyes in Central Australia forces you to think of the source of light, whether it's beam, lantern or sun, and to think of it as the most impressive, most flexible and richest tool imaginable for an artist. Why couldn't a painting change its shape, form and colour, he asked. This question preoccupied Ostoja in the years ahead as he sought new methods for expressing its intensity and that experience that he had in the outback. That's his question. So Ostoja arrived in Adelaide in 1954 and held his first one-man exhibition at the Royal Society for the Arts in the following year. He immediately found friendship and support in his fellow Polish artist, Władysław Dutkiewicz, who was working in a strikingly similar way. They worked as house painters to supplement their incomes and often exhibited together. Adelaide was a city experiencing cultural change, with new ideas taking root and finding patronage. The sympathetic milieu of artists, designers and architects were supportive of modernism, with many of them émigrés with direct experience of European training. Ostoja was soon able to gain the support of Adelaide establishment families. He was commissioned to make private and public murals working with modernist architects such as Brian Claridge. And that support was absolutely pivotal to why Ostoja stayed in Adelaide. And as John Dowitz shared with me, Adelaide had everything that Stan needed within reach, and he was incredibly adept at utilising the support of all kinds of people in the realisation of his many ambitious projects. This is an example of the work that Ostoja was making after and exhibiting at this time. And this one, for example, he won a prize at the Cornell Prize at the Contemporary Art Society in 1957, and the work was subsequently purchased by the Art Gallery of South Australia, so an early endorsement. Ostoja was also working in film after his arrival in Adelaide, making The Quest of Time. It featured a classical score composed by and performed by David Dowitz. He quickly established collaborative relationships and the support of important benefactors, such as the car racing and music enthusiast Derek Jolly. Jolly, of the Penfolds family, had the means to invest in the latest sound and recording technology, which he shipped to Adelaide, and his technical support would be crucial to many of Ostoja's many projects. Ostoja also settled in Arbroath in Stirling on the estate of Edward Stirling Booth and Freya Booth, the daughter of Hans Hyson, where he lived until his death 40 years later. John Dowitz, then a young artist, recalls that he and Ostoja shared their abstract photography in slides to a soundtrack of experimental music at the home of Sir Hans Hyson at that time. Doesn't that just seem wild? Apparently, Sir Hans was really excited. Speaking of support, I'll return to that a bit later, but I guess I wanted to say at this time, Ostoja was reaching out to major galleries around Australia, trying to interest their directors into giving him a major exhibition of his experimental photography. He wanted to do a performance with 20 slide projectors, and his approaches were unsuccessful. It just was outside of the realm of possibility for these directors to support a one-off performance. Seemed crazy. So theatre design was another area that Ostoja just fell into in Adelaide and really expanded his visual language. And it forced him to work in 3 dimensions. This is the State Library here has a remarkable collection of Ostoja's preparatory drawings, models, ideas for his many theatre designs. So it was a role, the theatre design, that was particularly suited to his talents. And from the late 50s to the early 60s, he worked on a constant flow of productions, working with the Elder Conservatorium of Music, the Adelaide University Theatre Guild, and the Elizabethan Opera Company. His productions included Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, Patrick White's Ham Funeral, and Verdi's opera Macbeth. And in 1960, his design for Orpheus introduced quadraphonic sound delivered on the latest pioneering audio equipment imported by Jolly. The production combined dance, music, and singing. So this kind of way of working was very original, and I think that it's fair to say that it's an area that that maybe made the most significant contribution. So Ostoja's search for multi-dimensional imagery also found expression in every medium, including drawing. And for example, he was inspired by the writing of Kandinsky and applied his writings and teachings to his own art. And Kandinsky's belief that you should apply the methods of music to art. And for this, the results should be of a modern desire for rhythm in painting, for mathematical abstract construction, for repeated notes of colour, for setting colour in motion. And so Ostoja tried to bring, I think, Kandinsky's teachings to life. He also maintained a practice of drawing to music, and he did that in his student days in Dusseldorf. And this drawing is a pen and ink from the 50s or early 60s that also attempts to capture that experience. He made also drawings like this of landscapes. So they're his en plein air drawings, very sparse. Now, speaking of support, I wanted to also share that one of the ways that Ostoja supported himself in the early years, and actually all the way through his time in Adelaide, was to take erotic photographs of, and he was commissioned to take them. And the State Library here has a remarkable collection of those, dating from the early 1950s all the way through to the 1980s. And here I've just selected two of the more tasteful and decorous ones. More. So Ostoja identified light as his primary medium, and in a counterintuitive move, he turned to technology to bring him closer to his goal. And in the late 1950s, he experimented with electronic images, which he produced on a specially constructed TV cathode ray gun. So he approached the electronic engineers at the Philips Electronic Workshop at the Australian Research Laboratories in Hendon to construct a method of manipulating waves of magnetic fields. And this process enabled Ostoja to use the television as a controlled light source. And through his experiments, he could achieve abstract designs on the screen that fanned out into a myriad of forms. And here are two wonderful examples. So Ostoja shared his new discovery, which he termed electronic painting, in an exhibition at the Argus Gallery in Melbourne in 1964. And this is a design that he made of its installation, which looks something out of, 2001: A Space Odyssey. And of the 120 photographs that he created, he selected 44 and approached the esteemed modernist photographer Wolfgang Sievers to help in the printing of his works. He framed the photographs like paintings and exhibited them in diagonal hangs. Oh, wish I could have been there for that. So the exhibition also included chromasonics, a set of lamps which changed colour in response to the frequency and volume of electronic music being played in the gallery. The exhibition was groundbreaking but disastrously reviewed by local critics. Actually, that's a bit of a leitmotif for him. They were not receptive to his contention that his photographs were in fact a continuation of the painting tradition, that his brush was light and the television screen his canvas. I think these photographs remain amongst Ostoja's most suggestive and aesthetically resolved works. And his exploration of the artistic potential of technology placed him within an international movement, one that comprised a small collective of individuals who were working along similar lines in Europe and the United States. Ostoja knew he was not alone. However, in a 1970 interview, he expressed his disappointment and bitterness that unlike Otto Peiner from the Zero Group in Germany, he had not received institutional recognition. It is worth noting that despite Ostoja's long-standing engagement with photography, he has also not been recognised in most histories of the medium in Australia. So, following the poor reception of these electronic paintings, Ostoja pressed on in new directions. He dedicated himself to creating large op artworks, such as this, the imagery emerging from his experimentations with light manipulation, projection and refraction. And I really love the idea that has been made in connection by other art historians with the work of Polish folk art from the Łowicz paper cutout tradition, such as this from the same time. And Ostoja had these examples in his own collection. So if you think about that and the kind of optic fields he was creating in his work. And he also used a range of unconventional, of course, non-traditional materials and methods, including collaging reflective adhesive tape used in roadside and aircraft construction onto plywood to create purely optical forms. And these works are his best known in Australian art histories, and for which he was most collected by museums in his lifetime. He's also at this time exhibiting the works and including sound-activated sculptures in the space, providing 3D glasses to his visitors to enhance their experience of his op art paintings. So concurrently, Ostoja also began collaborating with John Dowitz on multidisciplinary performances, which he called Sound and Image. And from the 1964 Adelaide Festival for the Arts, the Ostoja and John Dowitz collaborated on 3 Adelaide Festival presentations of sound and image. The first performance they developed with the dancer and the Australian Dance Theatre founder, Elizabeth Dowman, and also working with very experimental electronic music by a Dutch composer, Henk Baldings, who was a visiting lecturer at the Elder Conservatorium, creating really immersive experiences in small and intimate-sized theatres. And again, even though these performances may have not been well reviewed, or critics were divided in their views, Ostoja had a clear sense of their experimental purpose. And again, for another performance, Ostoja contacted the I'll get to that later, sorry. In 1966, for another iteration of Sound and Image, Ostoja and Dowitz invited the Brazilian dancer Antonio Rodrigues for the sole performer of a piece on a stage with a changing rotation of projected images. And here you can see and get a sense of what that might have been like. Those slides that were projected were manually changed and dimmed, with the images dissolving into each other, with Dowitz and his family members busily working behind the scenes. So, in 1967, Ostoja received a Churchill Fellowship and travelled and set out a very careful itinerary for himself meeting with leading scientists and artists and musicians working in related fields. And he visited Stanford University in California, where he saw a laser for the first time. And upon his return to Adelaide, Ostoja contacted the Weapons Research Establishment Laser Laboratory in Salisbury and negotiated the use of their laser. Isn't that wild? With the assistance of Fred Thoneman, the lead developer of laser technology at the facility, Ostoja was able to achieve one of his most incredible collaborations for the performance of his 1968 Adelaide Festival Sound and Image work. And, you know, that laser, firstly, that he was able to get it out of a highly secure facility that was, just that weapons research was confidential. I believe that he was able to secure it because Fred, who was the partner of Pam, let me just check, Cleland, who had, Pam Cleland, who had, they had commissioned a wonderful modernist home in Waterfall Gully and had worked with Stan previously on a commission. So it was through his circle, somehow, Fred recognised his brilliance and wanted to help him realise this crazy idea. And in the Latvian Hall in Wayville, they managed to stage with this laser a production which featured a science fiction play, The Veldt, about a future in which children are able to visit anywhere they like through large screens in their homes. The children become interested in lions only to have the computer take over the commands and send the beasts into their homes to eat their parents. Ostoja sourced the footage for the performance from the South African Tourist Cooperation and shot additional footage at Taronga Zoo. Unfortunately, no film or recordings are known of this concert. So, the increasing ambition of Ostoja's projects was evident in, for example, this presentation on the streets of Adelaide from also one of those 1960s Adelaide festivals. And in 1970, when he contributed this remarkable sculpture of a 36-metre chromasonic tower that was erected in Victoria Square, comprising of 400 globes, and the tower made sound activated by the movement of cars and people in the vicinity. How remarkable. So, the towering scale of this chromasonic tower in the heart of the city was a realisation of what must have seemed fantastical on paper. And then in 1971, as a creative arts fellow at the Australian National University in Canberra, Ostoja modified the design, again creating public works of over 30 metres that must have seemed like a visit from the future. Here's a photo of him from that time. Collaborating with the composer Don Banks, the director of music at Goldsmiths College in London, the pair staged a large audio-kinetic production, Synchronos. And here are a couple of photographs that give you a sense of what that must have been like. And a film from the archive here that tells us a little bit about the project.
Electronic music machines, laser beams and a jazz band share the same concert platform at the Australian National University. The composers described the concert as a marriage of sound and colour, using the highest forms of technology. While audiences listened to specially written music played on a wide range of conventional and unconventional instruments, more than 1,000 visual images danced before their eyes. Called synchronous because of the synchronization of light and sound, the concert represents the combined talents of a composer, Don Banks, and an artist, Stan Ostoja-Kotkowski. Their experiments in music, art and electronics were conceived while both men were attending the Australian National University on creative arts fellowships. According to the composers, nothing is as brilliant or as beautiful as the light of a laser. They link projectors and special optical devices with their laser machines to translate music into color, shape and form. Then the images are beamed onto 6 screens inside the concert hall. A complete performance of Synchronos lasts 1.5 hours. The musical score has parts for clarinet, horn, cello, piano, organ and percussion. Added to this are synthetic music, singing, pre-recorded chamber music and of course the laser beams. Synchronos has received a mixed reception from the critics, though most of them agree its vibrations have pushed the possibilities of music a little further.
Yeah, what a great... and so the library here has, you know, some amazing resources of films that of Ostoja's work. And Ostoja continued to stage similar large-scale laser concerts in the 70s and 80s, and his energy and ambition was evident in his final performance in 1991, soon after the collapse of communism in Poland. Ostoja shipped 200 kilograms of equipment to Warsaw to stage Synchronos to a sold-out performances. And just as a way of concluding and some observations about the artist, I would say that despite the achievements of his first 20 years in Australia, the second half of Ostoja's career suffered from his inability to gain institutional support for his practice. Despite many direct approaches to state galleries, he was not awarded a major exhibition in his lifetime. And more significantly, given his international importance to the developing field of new media art, he was not successful in establishing a dedicated new media department in an Australian university, despite many approaches throughout the country. The radical, non-traditional media in which he worked, the often ephemeral nature of his art and its experimental qualities made it difficult for art museums accustomed to exhibiting two-dimensional works on walls. Indeed, it is only since the 2000s that art museum design has incorporated performance spaces as an integral component of their facilities. The lack of documentation of many of his performances has made it difficult for Ostoja to be written into Australian art histories or collected posthumously. In this regard, his reputation is still in the process of formation. The curator of the first posthumous museum survey at McClelland Museum of Art in 2019, Simon Lowry, found that this was due in part to Ostoja's character, maybe. Aside from these collaborative ventures with technicians and musicians, Ostoja remained quite isolated in the Australian art fraternity. This was partly on account of the new technology he was using, and perhaps also due to his intolerance for the prevailing conservatism. It seems that, in fact, Ostoja was adept at working with both progressive and conservative individuals throughout his long working life. It is perhaps more accurate to say that it was the conservatism of the art fraternity, in particular the attachment of curators and directors to a certain lineage of art, making that with its respect for traditional media of painting and sculpture, that was the most significant impediment to Ostoja's recognition. He continued to push forward in new directions in the 80s and early 90s, including computer-generated art based on fractal forms. Ambitious to the end, he fulfilled his calling. His early pioneering work in multimedia, laser art, computer art, and his method of working collaboratively with specialists across many fields would be central to creative and human endeavour. It's common practice today. Indeed, it is clear that Ostoja's proposition that technology would be central to creative and human endeavour has been proven with the passage of time. I'm going to end with a slide of a performance here at the State Library for Illuminate Festival in 2021, which some of you may have experienced, by Robin Fox, who, in a homage to Ostoja, created an incredible laser display. So I would say that Ostoja is an artist who still needs further recognition, who is finding it through the artists such as Robin Fox, who are translating many of his ideas and values into performances today. And obviously there's a lot more still to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. I've looked at a lot of Stan's images, and I've learnt a lot today, and I'll go back and have a look at those images in a different way. Maria's happy to take a few questions if you'd like to ask a question. I see there's one down the front. If you'd like to be nice and loud, please.
I'll try. Thank you. Very interesting, Maria. Would you please go back to slide, I think it's about slide 13. That's one. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Next one.
Yep.
Now, what fascinated me about that is that I presume it's a woman on the right, seems to have some sort of helmet on.
Yeah.
It's connected. Do you know anything about what that was?
It is described in an essay, I think by Stephen Jones, in the catalogue from the McClelland exhibition. And I think that he had an idea that the helmet would be worn as a way of interacting with the works on display. So I'm not exactly sure how, but there have been some curators and writers that have gone into it. And obviously, as you can see there in that drawing, it does connect with all those ideas that he was exploring at that time of an interactive art. So the artworks were responding to the presence of the human in the space.
Fascinating.
don't know whether it's a real memory or not, of the 64 or 68 festival, going to Windy Point and watching some sort of laser in the sky. Is that something that happened at the festival, and was that Australia?
Yes, there was a laser show at Windy Point. Yes, and I don't know more about it, but I do recall Robin Fox talking about it and saying that the lasers today are so much more powerful, and maybe he was interested in recreating it. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's definitely one of Ostoja's projects.
I have a memory of getting a bus and going there and sitting, and I would be watching this. So, and thank you very much. Confirms that my memory was right.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, here in the front.
Several years ago, Fiona Salmon from the Florence University Museum of Art told me that she or her organisation, the Art Gallery, were working together to put on an exhibition of Stan's work, but that was pre-COVID and I haven't heard anything more, so is that true or is that...
There is no exhibition on the books, so to speak, but it's true. Flinders University has 400 works, the State Library here has thousands of works, and the Art Gallery of South Australia has some really significant works. So let's just say it would be a wonderful project for the future, certainly for all three organisations. Well, thank you for your attention today.